webinar, and most of you should recognize my voice. This is Kay Moshier McDivitt, and I met all of you during the month of May when we had our first learning sessions. I'm going to be facilitating the webinar today, and then Anna Blasco is also on the webinar, and after we get done with our presentation and discussion with our presenters, we're going to take audience questions, and Anna's going to be helping us with those audience questions. So as a reminder, okay, if you can just wait for a minute, I'm just having trouble getting there we go. So as a reminder, the Learning Collaborative is part of our initiative on reducing family homelessness in Virginia, the rapid rehousing approach, and this is a collaboration between the Alliance, the Commonwealth of Virginia, as you guys know, DHCD, the Freddie Mac Foundation, and the Virginia Coalition End Homelessness. During our first Learning Collaborative working sessions last month, a lot of you asked for the opportunity to hear from some different providers who have implemented the rapid rehousing model, and in particular, a lot of folks asked to learn more about the model for home-based case management and the idea of voluntary services. And one of the particular issues we heard a lot about was how to staff programs using this model and how you can prepare your staff for this role. So today, I think we're very fortunate to have two great providers with us who bring a wealth of information on this topic, and they're going to provide some tools that they use to implement the home-based voluntary services model and how they work to prepare their staff. So our presenters today are Kimberly Tucker, and Kimberly's the director of Flagler House, part of St. Joseph Villa in Richmond, Virginia, although I think Kimberly just got a new title and she can share that with us when she speaks. And then Vera Beech is the executive director of Community Rebuilders in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And I would think that some of you will recognize both of those names because during the learning collaboratives, as we had our discussions and people would ask for some ideas, I would often refer to different programs, and these are two programs that I talked about both Vera and Kimberly and some of the work they did. So we're going to do things a little differently today from some webinars. It's going to be a combination of some presentation materials and then discussion. So first, Kimberly and Vera are going to each take a few minutes to talk about their programs, the home-based case management voluntary service model, and some of the steps they took to move to this model. And then we're going to move to a discussion, and Anna and I took some notes on some questions that you guys asked during our sessions that we had, and so we've put some of those discussion questions out, and we're going to ask Kimberly and Vera to respond to those. So some reminders. First of all, today's webinar has been scheduled for an hour and a half. We wanted to make sure that we included ample time for you all to ask your questions and get some answers to those. And Anna's going to be monitoring those. You can ask those questions anytime during the webinar. We're going to take the questions at the end, but as Vera's speaking, as Kimberly's speaking, if you have a question for them, and if it's specific to one of them, make a note of that in your question. But on your webinar screen and the lower right-hand corner, you should see a box that says questions or chat, and that's where you can insert your questions and submit them, and then Anna will be getting those and reviewing those. A few reminders, you're all muted, and so all your questions will be coming through the box at the bottom of the webinar panel. We probably won't get a chance to answer all of your questions, but we'll keep track of those, and what we'll do is try to address any of those questions in our conference calls that we have with all of you in June. We still have one more conference call, I think Learning Collaborative 6. We still have to have that call tomorrow, or I'm sorry, on Thursday. I don't want to confuse you from Learning Collaborative 6 from the William or the Fredericksburg folks, but when we have those calls, we can address some of those unanswered questions. And we are recording the webinar, so some of you, if you want other people from your organization or some of your team members can't be on there, or organizations that can't join, we will be sending the link out to all of the Learning Collaborative team members. We'll send the link to everybody on this call, but we'll also send the link out to everybody as well, and you're welcome to share that link so that you have access to the webinar. So before we get started, I wanted to take a couple of minutes to review the necessary services and activities in rapid rehousing that we covered during our first Learning Collaborative session in May. We talked about the housing barrier assessment tool, and we really had a lot of discussion about this was not to determine whether people could go into housing or not, but was rather to be used as a tool to determine the kinds of landlords you might need to reach out to, the work that you would need to do to access the housing. But it wasn't about stability and whether people should be going into housing. We talked a lot about landlord recruitment and housing search and how that's such an important component. We talked about the short-term financial assistance. And then we talked about this home-based case management with voluntary services. And today we're going to focus more on this particular component of the necessary activities. So a little bit about the home-based case management model. It is a critical component of the rapid rehousing model, and to offer the follow-up services, I think one of the biggest concerns people have had around rapid rehousing is, you know, if we're housing people, but then they're still disconnected services and they don't have any assistance, aren't we just setting the system up to fail? So a critical component is this is not about just the housing and the financial assistance, but it's housing and financial assistance and a follow-up support, supportive services that can be provided, or voluntary case management services. So these services are key in helping families stabilize in their communities and maintain their housing. But really remembering it's about client-driven services, and they're focused on connecting your families with the services that they themselves have identified that they need for housing stabilization. So it's completely client-identified, client-driven. The model of providing these services can be particularly challenging for programs that are moving from a traditional shelter or transitional housing model that has always had required site-based services. And we know, and we've heard from you guys, that staff can often be reluctant or unsure that this is a good model to adapt, and they can really struggle with it. So our speakers are going to share how they made this transition and help their staff make the adjustment. We've had a couple of questions recently regarding the ESG case management requirements and how that fits into the voluntary service model. This slide covers the requirements that were recently issued by HUD in their SNAP's guidance. And in fact, I think shows that it does coincide when there's this number 2, meeting with program participants to implement the plan and monitor progress toward housing stability, and the HUD guidelines say there needs to be at least monthly contact. But it doesn't, I think some people interpret that means that people have to be mandated to participate in some specific type of program or specific type of case management. But the goal of the HUD guidance is that they want to make sure that there is that follow-up connection being made to, again, ensure that clients are getting what they need, getting the services leveraged, and can be helped to learn to identify the services that they need. And monthly contact can be made in a variety of ways. We talked about this during the clinics, or not during the clinics, but during our sessions on, using technology and using FaceTime if people have phones, or phone calls and doing that. But I think really looking at the third bullet on here really is connected to what we're talking about, and it talked about assisting program participants in obtaining appropriate identified supportive services. And the key is that this is not staff and program identified supportive services, but rather client identified supportive services. And HUD talks about making sure that those connections are there to state, federal, local, and private benefits and services, and that whole community networking that is so important for clients to be connected to. I always say, and you guys have probably heard me say this, is that one way to think about this is the role of the case manager in rapid rehousing is to help the clients obtain the permanent housing. But the client is then responsible to sustain that housing. And so if you communicate this to the client, then the role of the case manager is about assisting them and leveraging the services they've identified, helping them to learn to engage in the services that they want and need, that they say they want and need. And when the clients feel ownership of this, and most times in this kind of relationship, they're going to be more than willing and voluntarily participate because it's their plan and they're getting the benefit from it. And they're going to recognize this is what they want to do to maintain their housing. And then this last slide that I'm going to show before I turn it over to Kimberly, it probably looks familiar to you because we looked at this in the learning collaboratives, but I think this just speaks volumes for how you think about this. And this is the way we all function in our communities. You know, we as families are connected to just a variety of resources and support networks that help us get through our rough times, help us feel connected, and empower us to be who we are and do the things that we do. So I think most of us know that having that support network within our community that we can connect to is really key in helping us through any difficult time. And so this is really important to remember in rapid rehousing. It really can be a disservice to folks in our programs if we develop a program model that we provide everything the client needs and feel like we're the point person to make sure everything happens, because in some ways that's really creating a cycle of dependency instead of helping folks to really become part of their community and function just like the rest of us do as key members of our community. Helping our clients create a larger network of supports is really going to be a key role of the supportive services and this follow-up case management services in the rapid rehousing model. And so that being said, I want to turn this now over to Kimberly Tucker from Flagler House, who will spend the next few minutes giving us an overview of her program and the work she did with her staff to transition to a rapid rehousing model. So Kimberly, I'm going to put up your first slide here, and this is your introductory slide, and I'm going to let you go from here.
Okay, thanks, Kay. Good morning, everybody. I know we can't talk back and forth, which is kind of odd for us, but okay, and so I am the director of actually Housing and Homeless Services for St. Joseph's Villa, and for over almost 25 years we had a transitional housing program, a very traditional type of transitional housing program. We have now moved to a full rapid rehousing program, and as of this past weekend, our last clients at Flagler Home actually moved out. So we've plunged all the way, but we did it because we really believe this model works. So, and I'm going to tell you a little about why. So we can go to the next slide. So one thing I do want to tell people is that, when you've been a traditional shelter or transitional housing model, it's not going to happen overnight. So you need to have a timeline. For us, we were it took us about 3 years. I don't think it will take you that long because things have changed around and your environment has already changed. But for us, it actually was about almost a 3-year process. I would say, from a totally traditional transitional housing model to full rapid rehousing, depending on which way you're going, I would give yourself at least a full fiscal year. So we did plan a timeline of things that we thought would be changing. And of course, one thing you do have to look at is your staffing structure. Here, of course, TH is transitional housing, and SSO is a supportive services only grant that we had, which was already a community program, community-based services for homeless families, but it did not, it was not a rapid rehousing model. So we looked at both of those. One thing I need to suggest with that is that you definitely want to look at all of your revenue and your traditional resources and how can you change those revenue streams and maybe use them differently than you ever have. So in that sense, you're kind of starting at scratch. After we did the structure, I did give the staff a preview of what it would look like. I tried to keep the staff involved all along, at least at knowing the changes were coming. No one was shocked. We talked a lot about the new outcomes that HUD was looking for, that we were looking at, shortening the length of homelessness, how quickly people got into housing, and shortening the length of time that we actually serve them. We did begin new policies and procedures. I have recently finished those, and I think people that have worked in traditional transitional housing can understand this. I'm not really exaggerating too much to say that our policies and procedures when I first came here 5 years ago were about 5 inches thick. It was a very big notebook. And now our policies are about 6 pages long. So it is very different that way. You don't have as many rules and regulations. We developed a new budget, and of course we had a constant dialogue with all of our stakeholders, our local continuum of care, our board, the greater agency here. We're part of a large agency of 230 staff members, and so we have a very large agency that I was always having to educate about this rapid rehousing model. I'm ready for the next slide. Okay, so I know that not everybody has this, but you may have something else that's similar. What we actually had was a community program from HUD that we'd had for many years. But that program actually had some things in common with transitional housing. People could stay in that community-based program for up to 2 years. It wasn't particularly rapid. They actually had to find their own housing, and then we began services to them, supportive services. And we had the same sort of lengthy assessment process that we did at Flagler Home, which was to, really make sure people wanted to be part of a program and all of that. So, but what I did was I really wanted to take this program. This is before there was any funding for rapid rehousing, and I wanted to make it look more like a rapid rehousing program so that I could hang on to that funding through my continuum. So we lengthened, and this is at both Flagler Home and in the community, but the community program was the first one to adapt. We lengthened that whole intake process. It wasn't so much about, whether you want to be part of a program, but just do you need housing, and then you're going to work with us to attain that housing. We created the housing specialist position, and that is, some people call it a housing locator, but to me, a housing specialist really encompasses all of what that position does, and I think I have a little bit of an example later on, so I won't go into that. We reduced the service, again, our community program was 2 years. We reduced that to 3 to 6 months. That was hard for us because we were used to having people with us for a long time. The family life plan, which, gave people goals on every aspect of their life, their relationship, everything that they were working on, really changed to a housing stabilization plan, and just the things go into that plan that directly relate to them maintaining their housing. And then really, just to say that, we really set the length of service as what was right for that family. And if after 3 months or so they felt like, or 2 months, they felt like, hey, I've got my housing, I'm on my feet, I really don't need you in my life anymore, then that was fine, and that was success. That was hard for us. We felt like people, because we had that old family life plan, which we thought people should have originally, we always had them working on much longer goals. So we had to say, hey, they're housed and they're stable, that's success. Maybe they didn't accomplish everything in their life that we thought might have been helpful, but that's okay. So I'm ready for the next slide. So to me, this is kind of the crux of how we did it. You really can't change the program unless you change job descriptions. You have to have job descriptions that, of course, get the goals you're trying to achieve. So I actually sat down and rewrote, with input from my program manager, who's also title changed, rewrote every job description, basically. And I was really trying to incorporate all the things that need to happen in that. I shared those job descriptions with the staff 3 months prior to the end of that fiscal year, because I knew in the new fiscal year I was going to start the program off with the rapid rehousing focus. That way everybody really had a chance to look at it and think about it, whether this was really for them or not. And then we actually had people reapply. We interviewed current staff based on these job descriptions and got them to talk about why they, what parts, first of all, which job descriptions they gravitated towards. And then we really sat down, and it's very hard. It's very hard to do this, and when you have staff you know and you love, and you've been a team, but we really looked at what of those staff that were interested in those jobs had the critical skill sets necessary for those new positions. And so I came up with critical skill sets needed for each job, not just a job description, but the critical skill sets. We did develop, again, the policies and procedures and a flow chart. It took us a while to do that, but I will say it was very helpful, and the staff asked us for that a lot. So I do suggest a flow chart. And at some point I think we'll be able to simplify ours a little bit to make it more usable and share it with people through the National Alliance. And then we did a staff training retreat. This staff training retreat was very, very important. We talked a lot about values, the change in values, and the change in our roles. And so it took time but it was an important step. So I highly recommend some kind of a staff retreat or training period where you really let people open up about this change in their system and their lives. Next slide. So I mentioned the critical skill set. So for the housing stabilization case manager, for example, it's not the same as it was before, the kind of counselor you had inside of a transitional housing program. This person is really going to be continually assessing the client's progress and their real need, and realizing that, you know what, this family is actually ready to be on their own now. I'm going to talk to them about that. So there is that, not this assumption they'll just be with us for 6 months or they'll be with us for a year. You might have a kind of a time frame that you set, a general time frame, but remember, there's always assessing. There's always going on to see where the family is. Also, I upped the caseload from an extremely low caseload to a much higher caseload. Nationally, from what I've seen, rapid rehousing caseload is about 40 households. That may sound shocking, but you have to remember that not every family that you're serving is going to be at the same level of intensity. So, you know, I wouldn't, of course, have 20 brand new families on someone's caseload, but, you know, at any given time, you know, 7 to 10 are new. Some other ones have been there for a while. Maybe some other ones, you know, are going to be with us for a while because they have higher needs. But they really need to be able to juggle a higher caseload, and I have done that incrementally. So we went from up to 20 to this year 30, and we'll probably taper off around 35 if I'm able to. Then really it's a different focus now, as Kay has talked about. We're really connecting clients with all those things out in the community, and that takes some assertiveness on the staff, on the part of your staff. They need to be able to go out there and make those connections in the community for the families. And I'll talk a little bit more about that difference in a minute. So next slide. So again, everything has changed. Our intake assessment process has changed. It's shortened. It's much shorter. I don't know if many of you did. We have a kind of a treatment clinical mode here at the Villa. We did something called a psychosocial. That's been gone for a while. Our procedures changed, how we interacted with each other, how we made decisions. Our client files had to change. Our staff meetings, even our staff meetings and the types of meetings that we had changed. And yes, we're always tweaking this, so that's just part of the territory. It's not going to be perfect. You know, you're not going to just go from this to a rapid rehousing model overnight. It's going to be what fits for your agency and all. So stakeholder perception on the next slide. Again, you know, your stakeholders, of course, are your staff and everybody else that works with your agency. It was constant communication. We talked to the public about the numbers and the costs. Always started, as soon as we had the first rapid rehousing success stories, we shared those. We got people excited, and we let people know that this is not just the housing field. This is happening. At least being part of a larger agency, we were aware that this community-based trend was happening in all other services as well. I'm ready for the next slide. So, kind of in summary here, you know, there's a lot of things to talk about, but one thing I will say is I think a lot of people are trying rapid rehousing, but you do have to just try it, even if you have to take some private funds. And actually, we got started in rapid rehousing with private funds. Whatever you have to do, you'd be amazed how far $10,000 can go in rehousing a family. It doesn't go very far at transitional housing at your shelter or your transitional housing program, but it goes a long way to getting, you know, several families housed. So you really have to try it to experience it. And one thing I do want to say is that supervision is critical. With staff, you really have to constantly be touching base because people are used to a whole different way of operating and they're not comfortable necessarily in this new model. So we had to move away from that clinical team or treatment model where we sort of processed every case all the time and everybody had input. We needed to get workers who could actually use their own judgment and make decisions. For example, the housing specialist needs to be able to recommend the rental assistance amount. That doesn't come back to the full team for a big, long discussion about how long she might last. We've got a lot of barriers, you know. No, you make a judgment up front, because, again, we're assuming that people are going to step up to the plate. And by that I mean the client. It's gotten to the point here where we have been so surprised by some people that we would have thought were very high barrier, that in the old days we would have thought needed, you know, a full year at transitional and then lots of support when they moved into their apartment. Those people have really surprised us, how they've taken charge of their lives, gotten jobs, you know, gotten on their feet. So we've actually joked about that we don't like this term barrier anymore. You know, because they really aren't barriers; they're things you can move through. You need to really celebrate the successes that you have, and don't let the staff dwell or talk too much about the difficult clients. Sure, you're going to have some people that are going to move out there, and we had one, we moved her out. She quit her job shortly after she was in housing. She really hasn't found employment since then. I can't dwell on her. Meanwhile, I have 140 households in the Petersburg area, an area of very high poverty, that have, you know, found housing this year, and you know, call the office and say how happy they are. So you can't dwell on the few that are resistant. The last thing I wanted to just mention, and I think Vera talks a lot about this, but this is a key thing. Our role as social workers really changed in this model. We are no longer all things to all people. We could still have a holistic approach, but you're not fulfilling all of those things. And other agencies and organizations and churches are helping to fulfill that network. So the clients aren't always coming back to us for their solutions to help them with their housing or to help them with whatever, you know, different things. They really need to be connected to community-based resources so that they really can be on their feet. That has been, I think, the biggest change for us. That is the change in our role. We're not, you know, running the money management workshops all the time and all those things. It is really connecting people with what's out there and what they need. I think that concludes my part for now.
Okay. So thank you, Kimberly. That information has been really helpful. Can you hear me okay? Okay. So that information has been really helpful. Just as a reminder to all of you listening in, if you have any questions for Kimberly, please send them in through the chat box. Or, as Vera is speaking, submit your questions at any time, and we'll get to those at the end. So we're now going to learn about the Families in Transition program with community rebuilders and the strength-based community model. So, Vera, it's your turn.
Thank you. Hi there. Since 2007, Community Rebuilders has had great success delivering rapid rehousing services. And this success led our local continuum of care to adopt our model of service delivery as a coordinated case management model for our entire continuum of care. So what this means is that in our community, before a household is assigned to prevention or rehousing services through our centralized or coordinated entry program, the service provider needs to be trained and certified as what we call a housing resource specialist. The model is based on evidence-based practices of strengths-based theory, and it includes key components of motivational interviewing and solution-focused theory. The key reason that our community adopted our model is because it is cost-effective and produces superior outcomes. We rehouse homeless households in an average of 14 days, and 85% of the households served are still stably housed 12 months post-exit. The average amount of rental assistance we provide to households is $2,800, and the average length of assistance is 6 months. We know that these outcomes are easily duplicated, and today I'm going to share a few of the keys to our success with implementing the rapid rehousing services. Next slide, please. First, I can't stress enough that we have found it does not work to do what we have always done with the same mindset and values we've always had and operated within. The work of rapid rehousing truly does require a paradigm shift. This means you will replace old assumptions, values, goals, beliefs, and expectations, and even theories. When we talk about moving to a housing-first strengths-based model where consumers are the experts, and we insist that we focus on strengths and not barriers, we often hear those who are unable to produce our same outcomes say things like, we've always been strengths-based, and we do partner with our consumers, and we do believe they could be successful. However, what we've learned is that these people who haven't taken time to look at their values are often those who will struggle most in implementing a new housing-first, strengths-based model. If you have been operating successful programs that are designed to overcome barriers and deficits prior to housing, if you have a course or plan that you know your consumers should follow to be successful, if you are accustomed to doing for consumers and evaluating them, and if you know what's good for them and what kind of skills you think they need to have in order to maintain housing, you've most likely not made a shift to a rapid rehousing mindset that's going to produce superior outcomes. To help our staff make the necessary paradigm shift, we first provided a new set of core values and philosophies that we would operate within. We also took time to train our staff on conventional theories of poverty, and we were clear that we rejected any stance that blamed individuals or focused on individual deficiencies. We were clear that as an agency, we would not support interventions designed to change the behavior of the individual in order to escape from homelessness or poverty without giving regard to the impact of their social environment. Our employees could believe what they wanted in their personal lives, but it would be evident when they were at work that we would not accept any perspective that emphasized the negative personal characteristics of those living in homelessness, but instead we would be looking at the positive aspects of human behavior. We wanted to look at people's ability to cope with stress and manage risk with resilience. We would focus on strengths, and we would believe that there are no limits on people's abilities to overcome obstacles and achieve their wants and dreams. And we were clear that this type of thinking was the only acceptable thinking at Community Rebuilders. And if you had difficulty with that, we wanted you to know that it would be difficult for you to work at Community Rebuilders. We were adamant that housing is a basic human right, and that with the right supports, most anyone can sustain housing. We needed to change perceptions. If we were going to reveal housing as the solution to end homelessness, we were relentless about our change and our expectation that every action our employees took would be measured by our mission and our core values. I would really urge you to evaluate your core values and philosophies in light of the relevant changes that you'll be making, and think about what the new model means for your core values and activities. It is most likely that your new perceptions and focus on housing as the key to ending homelessness will help you to replace some of your old assumptions and goals and beliefs that may have served you very well in the past. I will be sharing a number of documents that Kay is going to make available to you. I will provide copies of our core values and our philosophies, as well as an agency assessment that you can use to see if you have the core values and philosophies that will really support your work as a strengths-based housing-first rapid rehousing agency. The next slide, please. We knew that we needed to create new assumptions about our work. A second key was that we really worked with our consumers to re-educate them about what our services were going to be and how they were going to be provided. When we told consumers the first few times that if they wanted housing, we would work with them, and simply they would have to work to increase their income. We would help them find a unit, and if they wanted to move into housing, we would help them. They almost didn't believe us, and we got a number of calls back. Our staff would meet with a consumer, and the next day or an hour later, we'd get a call from that consumer saying, okay, this is what your staff told me. She told me I just have to say that I want housing, that I'm willing to work to increase my income and maintain that housing, and you guys will get me into a house. So she for real. So it's really important for us to educate our consumers that we were no longer looking at what kind of services did they need up front, what kind of transitional housing program, or what kind of sheltering, but we were talking to them about housing. We moved out of a fear of failure mentality. It didn't matter if someone had zero income, if they were mentally ill, if they were living on the streets, or if they had been in the mission for 5 years. If they wanted housing, we believed that they could be successful, and no one was denied services. If they believed they could do it, we believed they could do it. And if they had doubts, we gave them hope and helped them identify the strengths in their past that they could use to achieve their goal of housing. We also knew that we needed to expand our relationships with landlords, but we also assumed that landlords wanted and expected the same from our tenants as their other tenants. We could not and did not offer any special promises or rewards for serving our consumers. We do promise that our tenants will have the full rights and obligations of leaseholders, and that we'll be there to help them ensure that they understand their roles and obligations, and also the landlord as well. But we did not offer any special incentives for serving our consumers who often have zero income, previous evictions, criminal histories. We knew that we couldn't do that, and we also didn't want to make promises we couldn't keep. I said that we moved out of our fear of failure, and trust me, that was one of the hardest things we did. It was really easy to worry about outcomes, and we needed to be able to have a place in our organization where we could talk openly and say things like, oh my goodness, are we really taking 30 people who are chronically homeless into the 6-month program? Are we going to be okay with our outcomes? We needed to have a voice say back to us, they'll be fine, they can do it. We needed that belief to continue from someone else when one of us doubted that it was possible. Our services are truly a partnership now. Our program orientation changed substantially. We share what we bring to the table when we meet with our consumers. That's one of the first things we do. We talk about what are the goals of the program, what are the outcomes that we need to achieve, and we ask the consumer if they match their goals. And if they do, then we can work together because we have shared goals. Consumers know that we are trying to end homelessness and that we think housing is the answer to ending homelessness. And guess what? Our consumers often think that too, and they want to help demonstrate the success to our community. Conversations that our case managers and now housing resource specialists used to have with consumers have dramatically changed. In the past, you would talk about all of the things that were getting in the way of their housing. And so you might have someone come in and they would be telling you that they lost their job or their babysitter quit or their car broke down. And there would be this real sense of emotional, oh, there's so much going on with this family, how are they ever going to do it? And that has really been replaced now with a focus on what are the goals that we have set together and how are we going to achieve them. And so if someone has a $50 payment due for their rent and they come in and they've had a lot of difficulties throughout the week and are kind of distracted from getting the $50 that we need to have them pay towards their portion of rent, our staff are going to be really clear about bringing that conversation back to the goals that they've established initially so that they don't leave without a plan to get the $50 to pay their rent. We had to make our program design fit our philosophy first, and then we had to change the things that we and our consumers assumed and relied upon in the past. For example, we had case managers in the past who were hot commodities because they had relationships with every other service provider in the community. And they had a Rolodex full of great referral sources and service connections. We were asking them to give up that edge on information, and now we educate our consumers about how to build relationships with those workers at, say, DHS, for example, or to reach out and receive the services that they need so that they are the experts about the community instead of us. Okay, next slide, please. We started out with a new vision, and we needed to let everyone know what we would achieve and why it was important. So from the very beginning, we knew that we wanted to reduce the length of time that people were homeless and remained in the homeless system. And we wanted to have exits from our program for households that would be stably housed. It was really important that our staff on a regular basis kept the vision of our outcomes in their mind, but also our consumers. For example, on a regular basis now, if you walk through our building, you'll see a sign on the wall, and it'll say something like, "Congratulations to Kim. She's housed a family in 6 hours and 20 minutes." So we wanted to make sure that we were always highlighting the great impact that we were having and why we were doing this work. Consumers and staff participate in focus groups on a regular basis. We do monthly trainings with our staff on the model to make sure that they are learning and enhancing their skills. We have a wall in our training room that is updated with pictures on a regular basis of stories of our consumers in their own words so that they can inspire hope in others who maybe have been living on the street and don't believe that housing is possible for them. It's just not a new program or a new type of program. For us, it's a new vision and a new way of ending homelessness. And we believe that it takes all of us applying our strengths and resources together. We do with our consumers, not for them. Next slide, please. As you go forth and begin to enhance your rapid rehousing programs or create your rapid rehousing program, I would also recommend that you do not underestimate or underdedicate resources to training, retraining, to listening, and relearning. We, as I mentioned, held monthly training meetings for our entire team. We changed our model of service delivery, but we also changed our supervisory model to match. It was also very important for us to always have champions and know who they were. We needed someone who would stick to the model and keep spirits high in challenging times. And you're going to want your staff who you know truly get the model and are able to talk about it, because they are going to get a lot of slack, I think is the best word, from outside people who don't understand the change and don't understand the model and want to know, hey, are you just really throwing rent money at people, or are you helping them long term? And are you giving them the supportive services that they need? So you need someone who can always champion that cause and be a spokesperson and not get discouraged when there's a lot of people who are challenging what is being done. We also found that it is really important to celebrate successes. We do this with our consumers each step of the way and with our staff. It really helps to keep hope alive, and it's an important part of our consumers' continual motivation to improve their circumstances and to maintain their housing. It's also very important to make sure that you know what you are tracking and why, and share your data regularly. Many will not believe that rapid rehousing can work until they see the data. And finally, I'll leave you with a quote. Some people change when they see the light, others when they feel the heat. I share this quote because I hope it will remind you that change is hard and everyone does it at their own pace and for their own reasons. But ultimately, if you're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, you may need to change the peg. We have sometimes held on to long-term staff too long simply because of their previous history and success with the organization. What we learned is that if they can't adapt to the new paradigm, that it's important that we help them move to a place where they can and will be more successful. It will benefit your program and your consumers. And the same is true about past values and beliefs that no longer serve you well. It's important to cast them aside. They might have worked really well when you were providing shelter or transitional housing, but it's very important to look at those values and see if they work for your rapid rehousing services. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Vera, for giving that overview, and I want to thank both Vera and Kimberly for sharing what they've done with their organizations. So what we're going to do now is that there's a number of discussion questions, some questions we had gotten during our sessions, and I'm going to share those questions and have Vera and Kimberly respond to them. And then again at the end, I do know there's some questions coming in, and we'll have our speakers address those questions. But first, one of the questions that we've often gotten is, for programs that are just moving to the model of home-based case management, what do you think is the most important step in preparing the staff to implement the model? So Kimberly, since you're really sort of more in the beginning stages of this, can you talk a little bit about what you think is the most important step in preparing your staff for this new model?
Yeah, I think one thing that's important is sometimes we as the managers and supervisors are out in the community hearing about this, and we've got our workers in the trenches. So I think it's really important that we have them attend the COC meetings, be part of some of those committees and things, so they start really hearing about these changes sort of firsthand. But I do think just education and talking about the data, discussing it, and just talking about how it would work. So it's just education in the beginning is the main thing. But I do think exposure to some external forces or whatever are a good thing.
So, and I also know, I mean, you talked a little bit about some of the staff training that you did, and I actually heard both you and Vera, and then Vera, we'll let you jump in too, but both of you, one of the words I wrote down as you were talking is you both talked about the training and, the training and retraining and constantly doing that. Can you just talk a little bit about, when you talk about training, sort of what do you do with your training? How did you do the training? I know you did a retreat with your staff in the beginning. So can you talk a little bit about how you did that?
Well, and we really started with the outcomes, and so it goes a little bit to that quote about feeling the heat. Like our environment has changed, and our continuum is looking at these goals they're trying to meet for HUD. So we sort of started with the outcomes and worked our way backwards. So like if we're trying to have people housed, in a very short period of time, how are we going to do that? And we sort of brainstormed and we talked to them, if we're going to have people in shelter, shorter periods of time, what would that require us to do to change? So that was sort of I think how I began it, was with the outcomes that we were trying to move towards.
Okay. So Vera, you want to talk a little bit about what you see as one of the most important steps in preparing staff?
Sure. So I think one of the most important things for us is we created a basic 40-hour training that provides an overview of housing first and our strengths-based case management model. We really wanted people to have the tools that would help them to quickly rehouse someone, but then also to be able to focus on the sustainability of that housing right away. So we needed them to be able to develop plans that would be relatively short, but also address any significant barriers or issues that were coming up in their life and causing difficulty with their housing from a historic perspective. So we did our training in a manner that they would actually review the forms and how to use them that would be used in the programs and create those plans. I can tell you that the greatest struggles for our staff in the greatest training area was in the area of goal setting. We did multiple trainings on how do you set goals with consumers because we needed them to do that in a very different way than they had in the past. So that took a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of practice. And then it was really important to, on a regular basis, to not only have our frontline staff, but our managers and our supervisors involved in, like, oh my goodness, I did this decision today, and I don't think it was really driven by housing first strategies or strength-based strategies, and to be able to admit that it's easy to fall back into old ways and that was okay for all of us, but our goal was to strive to have the impact that we wanted at the end. And so there was a lot of dialogue on a regular basis about how did it go this week, what did you learn, and what was different for you this week than in the past.
Okay. So I think what I'm hearing is, it takes some planning and thinking through and knowing what you want to train on. It can't be haphazard. I do know one of the things that we heard that a lot of you as organizations in the Learning Collaborative set goals was to go back and start, training your entire organization on the rapid rehousing model and some of these new concepts. And I think I heard this on some of the follow-up calls is that, the decisions have been made. This is going to be an ongoing thing. It's not going to be a one-time and done. And I think we're hearing that from both Kimberly and Vera, that it's ongoing. It's not once and done and then you're done with the training and you're ready to move. But as Vera just said, given the opportunities to even come back and say, oops, maybe that wasn't what we needed to do. So another question that we've gotten a lot is it doesn't seem effective to give clients money for rental assistance but then not require that they participate in services and life skills that would really help them maintain their housing. So how can clients really be successful in this model? So Vera, you want to tackle that one?
Sure. So we begin by never deciding how much rent assistance someone is going to get in isolation. We always do that with the consumer. And that begins when we start looking at what kind of unit they're looking for, what kind of housing do they want to live in, and adjusting maybe what they really desire with what they can afford and what they can afford without our assistance. So in the past, for example, you know, we would look at fair market rent, and if a program allowed us to go up to fair market rent, our consumers would just find a unit under fair market rent. Now we're often finding units that are below fair market rent simply because they're going to need a lower rent when we're no longer there giving them assistance. So they're part of that process from the very beginning of how much money are they going to need. And the plan is set in the beginning, and then it follows a course where consumers will begin contributing contributions to their rent or setting aside money for rent if the program rules prohibit them contributing to their rent. So it's never something that we decide on our own. And the same is true with services. So if we want to know from the very beginning, like what got in the way of your housing success in the past and maintaining housing in the past, and what do you think is going to get in your way in the future? And then we help them to identify those things and identify plans to avert those things or prevent them from happening. And so services are there, but they're really based on what does the household need for housing stability, and what do they need that we can provide that will still help them function in a normalized environment, meaning they're not reliant on us to provide that service or meet that need for them.
Okay. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And I don't know, Kimberly, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, sorry, I just had my screen just went off. I would agree with that completely, and then just that some people we might have thought really need some of those services, and it turns out they can really manage in a different way than we might have planned to maintain their housing. So I think we're going to see financial management. I mean, that's something that continues on but whether they attend a class for financial management services or they just work it through with their stabilization worker each month. It may not be to the extent that we would have really liked to have seen them tackle that problem, but as long as they keep working it through, then they are working on it.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's move on to the other question. So I think this is probably the one we get the most. Aren't we just setting clients up to fail if we put them in housing before they're ready? What about that person that has no income and no motivation to get a job? And Vera, I'm going to let you start with that because you already talked a little bit about how you had to change this paradigm.
Sure. I think, what my staff often say is housing is an amazing equalizer. And once households get into housing, things really change. It's very different to be thinking about getting employment or increasing your income when you're living on the streets. So don't underestimate the power and the hope that will build just by having someone move into housing. And we truly, one of our core values is that we believe our consumers. And if a consumer says, yeah, I believe I can do this and I want to give it my best try, we're going to support them in doing that. And we have found it to be very successful. And this is just one of those areas where the outcomes really speak because most of our consumers come into our programs with no income.
And I think that's a key point because I think that's a lot of what some concerns are. And so I guess then the other question, I'm going to follow up with that a little bit, and then Kimberly, you can add to this. But one of the questions that I thought about based on one of some conversation we had in our call yesterday with the Fairfax Learning Collaborative, Fairfax, Arlington, Alexandra, is that the struggle of getting landlords then to, even with the financial assistance, if you can't guarantee rent for a year, that they're having, how do you get landlords to rent when people are coming in with no income?
Yes. So I think what's really important is we share with our landlords the struggles of our consumers, and they know that the employment world, especially in Michigan and probably in Virginia as well, it's very difficult right now. So we do a couple of things. First of all, we also focus on non-traditional ways to earn income. So we're not only focused on did they get a part-time or a full-time job, but we're looking at things like, okay, this gentleman has a skill at artwork, and so he's going to create greeting cards and sell them. We're looking for really non-traditional ways for our consumers to make enough money to pay their rent. And our landlords know that. And honestly, our landlords are probably, it's a lot easier to convince our local landlords than it is our other local service providers that someone who has zero income can move into housing. So you've got to build that trusting relationship with your landlords and let them know what your consumer is trying to accomplish, and let your consumer convey that to the landlord, because that will help them to build that relationship with the landlord and build that trust.
Okay. Kimberly, do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I think the same thing. It has a lot to do with building that landlord relationship, and it starts to build on itself so that after a while you pick up the phone and you barely got the words that are like, sure, I've got a place available. And you couldn't see in the beginning that it would go that well, but once they have the experience of these folks working out with you, they're willing to trust you. So yes, we do find landlords even in the Richmond area, which we thought would be harder, because we have a rapid rehousing program in the Petersburg area. The landlords don't seem to be quite as picky, but even in the Richmond area, we have begun to find landlords that are willing to rent to families without income.
And so, I'm just going to sort of put you on the spot, Kimberly. So, somebody comes to you and says, so aren't you just setting up your clients to fail when you're putting them in housing before they're ready? What's your response to that?
Well, actually, I agree with Vera's response on this, and that is really, it's amazing how people do step up. That when you put them in housing, they feel settled, they feel secure. We do have an employment specialist. We do not provide job services or job training, but we do connect people to that. And what we have found in this past year, we've been transitioning away from transitional housing and also had a rapid rehousing program in Richmond. It was actually the people that were already in their apartments that were calling her more and staying in touch with her by email about the employer connections, and saying, yeah, I want to go to that job fair, or yeah, can you give me a ride to that? She's like, this is interesting. They're already in there. I said, yeah, well, they value their housing. So the people that are in their housing are really able to focus on the things that it will take to get them to hold on to that housing. So I think that that's more of our fear than a real issue.
Okay. So then the next one is this thing about this case management. What if a client cuts this case manager off? If we cut off the rental assistance, won't they just end up in the homeless system in another few months? So Vera, I know you said you wanted to talk a little bit about that.
Sure. I think the most important thing that you can do, if you have a situation where your consumers are no longer connecting with your case manager, is look at your case management process. Because if you are really building a rapport with your consumers and they feel engaged in their plan, they're not going to just cut you off. They're going to stay engaged. We routinely have our consumers come back in at the end of services. They know when their services are going to end, and they still consistently come in to do a satisfaction survey for us and report on their plans for the future. So I think it's really important to look at what are we doing that's maybe not helpful to consumers and making them want to connect. One of the important things that our staff are trained to do is they ask at the start of every meeting with a consumer, what needs to happen today for this to be valuable for you? And they then need to help that to occur. So that's really important, and I think you'll see if you're doing those kind of things, you won't have households who are just disappearing on you. The other key piece is that part about the rental assistance and making sure consumers, we learned very early on that it is not helpful to provide all of the rent for the 6-month period and then all of a sudden have our consumer need to pay their whole amount of rent. We have found that it is most useful for consumers to begin contributing towards their rent over a process of time through a goal process that they set with their staff person, and that they are able to achieve it in increments versus all of a sudden. So it's really important to make sure that they know what resources you have available financially and what you're going to provide to them, and when it's time for them to take over and get agreement on that plan.
That's great. Kimberly, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I really like that Vera talked about, looking back at your case management process first, if you have a client who's refusing to meet with you, and really seeing, were we missing something there in engagement, where we kind of maybe relapsing to our old ways of, you have to do this and we're doing, but are you really going with the new vision of how we treat people? And then also there is a skill level there, and this is where some team meetings come in handy back in the office, and that is, we have had clients who, struggle with some mental health issues and really need to be connected to services. And so when we've done that, then things have, they've gone smoother again. But if people, really need to be on medication or whatever, then we really try to nudge them towards connecting with that mental health service so that they can get back on their feet. And that has really made a difference. So I would say, to keep. But again, I think it's a case management role, and maybe where we were not as attentive or not as engaging.
If I might just add one thing to that, Kay. One thing that's also very important for us is that our consumers and our landlords always get 30-day notice before we are ever going to end our assistance. So both the tenant and the landlord will always get written notice at whatever cost. So there have been times when, for example, a staff has forgotten to send out that 30-day notice on time. What that means is that person's going to stay in the program longer, because we have guaranteed everyone that they will have a 30-day notice before Community Rebuilders withdraws from the transaction.
Okay. Thanks. And we're going to ask one more question, and then we have a bunch of audience questions, and so we'll turn it over to Anna for those questions. But the next question, here I go. Every now and then, there we go. So I think this thing about how do you arrange visits and how often do you see clients, but I think particularly this idea of should the case manager drop by unannounced. And I know, Vera, you've talked about that some.
Sure. We would never drop by unannounced. We are truly their partners. We're not their babysitters. We don't check up on them. We work alongside them and walk alongside them as they try to reach their goals. So it really is based on what does the consumer need. Sometimes you'll have a consumer who's going to meet with you 3 times a week for a while, and then you're going to see them once a month. It really is individually and based on the progress that they're making and the supports and connections that you need to help them make.
And a follow-up question I have, and this is for either of you. So the idea of sort of transitioning, when you're going from programs that have staff that, like clients come into your office, and that's, or you work with them in the building, you have an interview room, and that's where you do, and now you're asking folks to go out and do home visits. How has that transition, what's been some of the challenges of that transition?
For our agency, it really is about meeting the consumer in the most comfortable place for them, and quite often that is our office. And I know, Kay, that you have an idea of some of the changes that we made in our physical infrastructure to make this model work. We were really lucky to be able to, that we moved to locations at about the same time that we were implementing these models. And so we have set up our facility to be very family-friendly. We have what we call family rooms, and so most consumers, their preference is to come into our office. But we would also, if someone was uncomfortable coming here, we would meet them in a public place. We would meet them at a library, at McDonald's, whatever was going to be most productive. But most often, people still do choose to come to our office, and we're okay with that. We do have some programs where staff go out and do home visits, and it's just really important that you cover all of the safety concerns that you normally would as an agency when people are doing home visits.
Kimberly, did you want to add anything? And then we're going to turn it over for audience questions.
Were you asking about the same question, the original question?
Yeah, the idea of yeah, home visits, or just that dropping by.
Well, we've been doing. We've had this community-based program for 20 years, so we've always done community either in the home, or sometimes me and a client, if they want, maybe on their work break at lunch. We've even had at times we had one family years ago where they could they worked all weekend, so that actually the worker had to meet with the parents on Saturday, and that was the best time for them. We have been very flexible on that. We do not do unannounced drop-by visits unless the client has been out of touch, and we actually have a policy of, I believe, three trying to get to them, home before we give them that 30-day notice. So just to make sure that everything's okay, maybe the phone, maybe things have been cut off or whatever. This is really kind of more of a safety thing. We just don't want to have somebody, fall into a deep depression or have, really cut themselves off from others and not be doing okay. So that's the only time that we do the unannounced, is when we just can't reach them.
Okay.
But we don't do a drop by just to kind of check and see if their housekeeping is good or whatever.
Right. Okay. All right. So I know we have some audience questions. So Anna, I'm going to let you share with us what we're hearing from those folks on the call.
Sure. And I just wanted to say we have some great questions. And if you did have a question that you were meaning to ask but you haven't sent it in, please feel free to do so now. So I was wondering if both of you could just quickly talk about, we've had a couple of questions regarding staff turnover. Could you maybe estimate how many staff you lost in this process, and maybe talk a little bit about how you dealt with staff turnover?
Okay, I can jump in there. So we've only lost one, and that wasn't through this process. So partly it was also because, though, I was able to expand. So we started a rapid rehousing program in a nearby city, 30 minutes down the road, so that I didn't have to choose between two workers, and I'm so glad that I didn't, because no, I've only lost one person, and that was not due to this particular restructuring.
We also were able to expand, and that was helpful. We didn't lose a lot of staff. We did notice that a couple of our staff struggled. Of our long-term staff really struggled, and it was harder for them to learn. And it did help to bring in fresh staff who maybe didn't have all of the history and old experience when our programs were expanding. And that really helped bring along some of our longer-term staff who had been here in the past and were struggling a little bit to make the change.
What type of landlords have you found work best with this program? And I guess also quickly, what are your location efforts to reach these landlords?
Well, we work with about 800 landlords in our local community, and it is a little bit more difficult to work with the large property management companies than it is the private landlords, typically because they like to charge fees to run background checks or application fees and things like that. Things that we don't typically pay and our consumers typically don't have money for. So it takes a lot of negotiating to get those large property management companies to negotiate on those things. We also do a lot of negotiating with landlords on our leases. So if maybe utilities aren't included and this consumer needs them to be included, all of those lease negotiations can take some time, and that is always easier with private landlords.
And can you also, Vera, share how long you've been doing this, working in this model to build that landlord base of 800 landlords?
Sure. Well, it's important to know that Community Rebuilders has been around for 20 years, and we are also landlords. We own a number of properties within the community, so we have been part of the Rental Properties Owners Association for about 20 years. And so landlords knew us and knew of us, which was helpful. But I think as our programs expand, we have been getting more and more landlords engaged. And it is best, I think, if they can hear from other landlords about you. So if you have good landlords that you're working with, it will be really important for you to connect that to them and see if they can spread the word. And it's also really important to make sure that your landlords have really accurate information to give out.
Yes. I can follow up and say, yeah, I think the misconception is, I mean, it's true that the individual landlords are easier to work with. They don't have, but we, from the very beginning, we actually made contact with some property management companies. So that they are there, and it turns out that property managers, as they're sitting in that little rental office, sometimes have more authority than we once thought they did. And we've, you know, if you win them over, we've had them really go to bat for our clients and really try to say, well, just give me this little bit more, and I think I can get them through. And we have put households into apartment complexes without income or with very low income. And so it just requires a lot of working with that person at that front desk. The way that we sort of started when we first got into rapid rehousing was we started really with the clients, went out and found the property they were interested in, and then we went and talked to the landlord. That's just the way to do it. And it ended up working. It's because they'd already made a relationship. The landlord kind of wanted to rent to them, but it was worried about the income. Then we stepped in, and it's like, we're here. So that really did help to open up some doors, different landlords to us. But it really started with the client. And we still work that way. Clients still go out and find their own landlords a lot once they understand the system and how it works and how we can help them. Then we started with, you know, staff over the years, knew different landlords and people, we've approached them. And now, of course, we do direct outreach, like cold calling by our housing specialist goes out and makes a point every week to, you know, meet some new landlords and property managers.
I hate to put you on the spot as far as data is concerned, but we do have an interesting question about your outcomes. So do you have an idea of how many clients remain in housing, however you measure that, if it's a year after services end or whatever statistic is easiest?
Sure. We have a centralized intake in our community, and that means that anyone who enters the homeless system comes into that centralized agency, and they're entered into HMIS. So what we do is we check for another entry into the homeless system in our HMIS system, and we actually track 6 months, 12 months, and 18 months post-exit.
And do you know what your averages are for that, Vera?
Sure.
Like your outcome.
So we have benchmarks that housing resource specialists have to meet within the community, and for the 12 months post-exit for rapid rehousing, the benchmark is 85%. Stably housed 12 months post-exit.
And that's after all rental assistance and case management, all services end?
Correct.
Okay.
12 months after all services have ended, are they still stably housed?
Okay. Thanks.
And we started 3 years ago with a pilot in 2010, and it was private funds that we used. And recently we had recently that data was pulled, and I had not actually thought to pull it, but luckily it was in HCIS. And so 3 years later, 92% of those families are still housed. So I have to admit, I was, you know, pleasantly surprised. That was a small group of about 30 households, but it was our first venture into rapid rehousing, and 3 years later, I thought was pretty great. We're looking at about where we've only been doing straight rapid rehousing in the Petersburg area for a little over 1.5 years or so. So we're looking, but it looks like 12 months out, we're looking at close to, I mean, it's in the 90% range. And then this year in Richmond with Flagler House, it hasn't been a full year yet, and so we don't really have that data. But everyone that we have placed this year is still housed.
That's excellent.
Actually, I just was corrected. One family is no longer housed and went to, I don't know. We were not sure where she went.
But she hasn't re-entered the homeless system, so she may not.
She hasn't entered HMI. Yeah, she hasn't entered the homeless system yet. Right. But yeah.
Because I think sometimes. I think sometimes we can sort of think, well, they're not in the housing we put them in, so that's a bad thing. But we all move, you know, people move, life changes, and so just because they're not in the housing you placed in, as long as, you know, you're not seeing them re-enter the system, obviously they could have gone, you know, someplace else. But I think that happens with all of us. So, you know, I think it's really being aware that it doesn't necessarily reflect badly on your program if the person is no longer in the housing you put them in, but you need to really be looking at, are they, back in the homeless system? They may have just found another place to move on their own, and something changed, within their housing. So,
Kimberly, this question's for you. Could you talk a bit about how the average length of assistance changed as your program shifted more towards the rapid rehousing model, financial assistance specifically?
Okay. Well, first of all, for most of the time that Flagler was in existence as Flagler Home, we didn't have financial assistance to help families. Our community program actually, which we use kind of like an aftercare program as well as for anybody else in the community, could provide utility deposit and first month's rent. But that was pretty much it, and that was if they chose to continue with us in that program. So right now, I would say that we seem in both in the Petersburg area, we're averaging about 3 months worth of rental assistance or so, but that really depends on the family's need. And then in the Richmond area, I would say it's more like 3 to 6 months, probably 4 to 6 months of average assistance, and we do try to do that on a declining basis. So like Vera was saying, the person doesn't just, it's 6 months, all of a sudden is paying their own rent completely. They're always contributing something if we can, if they do have income. Was that the answer to the question? The difference?
So can you hear me, Kimberly?
Yes.
This is Kay. So one of the things you might want to talk about, and I know you don't have the slide in front of you, but if you can think about is that I know that the difference that one of the things that you've talked about before is what your average cost per household was within your budget on the transitional housing model and what it is in the rapid rehousing model. Do you sort of know what that is off the top?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of embarrassing to say, but on the other hand, I guess we had a lot of great services. Flagler Home, when I came here 5 years ago, was about $43,000 per year per family. That included all of the overhead, the staffing. I had a couple of child services staff. We paid 100% of people's child care they received here on the campus. It has gone down to about $4,000, or you think less? I'm consulting with my staff, and they're telling me about $2,200 in the Richmond area, and it's well under that in the Petersburg area.
And so that includes,
yes,
the rental assistance as well as the staff time and the running the program.
Right. So actually, and so if you do talk about the whole cost of the program in the Richmond area, it probably is about $4,000. But that's including the case management time and all the overhead. But the actual rental assistance is about $2,000. That also includes our public housing funds. A lot of people know the case management. Right. A little bit of money. Right. Yeah. So anyway, it varies depending on what factors you look at. I'm just constantly amazed when I divide the numbers we're serving into our program costs and see it getting lower and lower per client, per household.
And as a follow-up question to that, we have some, Virginia's a very diverse state. A lot of, as you all know, there's a lot of high-cost areas, and there's also some more rural areas. So I was wondering if you could give us a sense of what the rent is in the areas that your programs serve.
So both for Richmond and Grand Rapids. Vera, do you know what fair market rent is?
Our average rent for a one-bedroom is $550.
And then for a two-bedroom?
7.
Okay. So that's definitely, and I'm sure there's some of you out there on the call that, are in the areas where, a two-bedroom can go for, $1,400 fair market rent. So that definitely makes a difference. And Richmond, do you know what the fair market rent is?
It's about, it really fluctuates whether you talk about a one-bedroom or a two-bedroom and what part of town.
But do you know what the fair market rent?
Yeah, fair market rent is about for a one bedroom about $575 to $650, and a two bedroom about $700 to $850.
Okay.
That is pretty similar to Kent County where we're at. The $550 average is the average of our consumers and what their rent rate is. So we're negotiating that down from fair market rent as often as we can.
So you say the 560 is actually what you sort of negotiate it down to a one bedroom?
550, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Because I think that's, yeah, and I mean, that's one of the things I think, Vera, you talked about was, looking at negotiating rents. And I know, again, that's going to be a struggle in some of the high-cost areas in Virginia, the Fredericksburg, Arlington, Alexandria, Fairfax area where, rents are high, and then when you look at vacancy rates. But a lot of the same stuff is translatable because we also know that there are communities like Alameda, California, that we talked about, where they've been able to successfully do it with an average amount of assistance, again, being in the $2,000 range, and their fair market rent is about $1,500 for a two-bedroom in Alameda. So, and maybe what we'll need to do is get them to be on one of our webinars to talk a little bit about the challenges for the high, the high-income areas sometime.
And Kay, one thing I wanted to add is just about that we did sort of remove that thing that we think that a certain size family has to go into a certain size apartment. We've gotten, in fact, we found that actually many times our families are really comfortable going into a smaller apartment because they feel like they're going to be able to maintain it when we're not there. So that isn't like, we're looking at these 2- and 3-bedroom apartments because they've got teenage boys and teenage girls, whatever. Families are working it out. They were sleeping differently sometimes before they came to us, and they're comfortable with, the daughter in the room with the mom or whatever. So we just have to look at some of those things too. So it's not always the apartment size that we thought in the past.
Yeah, good idea. And I think we have time for one more question. Is there one more that you would can put out, Anna?
Yeah, there have been a few more questions regarding the staff turnover. I think some people are very nervous about that aspect of changing their models. So for programs that have provided a lot of holistic services, I guess you could call them services for children, financial services, and they have staff members who are dedicated to providing these services, what kind of roles do you see those staff members moving into in a rapid rehousing model?
Kimberly, do you want to talk about that? Because I know you had a lot of sort of holistic services too at Flagler.
We did, and well, like I said, I really haven't had the loss of staff. I guess what
well, what new roles?
I had child. Well, one child services position went back to the county, and then another one just was part-time and left on her own, and I just didn't replace her. So I guess I can see that would be awkward, and it's just, I think you have to accept the fact that some staff members, if their preference really is working solely with children, you may not have a role with them in this because the client really is going to be the adult, and they may be able to work alongside you from a different agency, but in our program there wasn't a role for that anymore. I think in some there will be, but it will be a very different role. It'll be out in the community, and I'm just not sure. I'm just not so. I'm sorry not to be very concise, but I actually, those two positions were kind of removed from me right in the beginning of this process, and right before.
Vera, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, for us, it was really important to look at the new roles and see where their strengths would fit the best. And so that was really something that we needed to do with the individual employees, identifying where their strengths lie and how they could be useful in the new role. So we didn't want anyone thinking, oh, I'm really good at this now and so I can continue to do this. We needed them to figure out how does that strength that they have apply to the new role and really have a dialogue about that. And so we found that some people, for us, we've ended up dividing our roles a little bit. We have folks who really focus on like what we call an eligibility specialist role, and then others who do more of the kind of problem solving. I hate to use the word problem, but when difficulties come up or mediation needs to happen between the landlord and with a tenant, those folks tended to fall in one or two categories. Either they were really good at like determining eligibility and completing all the paperwork requirements, or they were really good with those interactions with consumers and landlords and kind of to help solve or find solutions to problems.
I can just add this, that one of my strongest housing stabilization case managers used to run a child care program. She loves the work she does now. So, I mean, I'm sure her, you know, when she's in the home and sees things with the children, she's good on those issues, but, you know, she's made that transition completely from, you know, so it hasn't been an issue.
Staff get really excited about the new outcomes. Like, it's really interesting to see them start to celebrate things like who can get somebody housed the fastest. You know,
Yes.
That would have never happened 5 years ago at our agency.
Right.
So they're focused on really different things, and they get a lot of pride from the outcomes that they produce.
We're experiencing that same thing here. It's pretty amazing. We email all the time. You know, oh, family came in this morning, living in their car. This afternoon they're sleeping in a nice apartment. We just had one this week. You know, family mother with severe domestic violence background was sleeping in a tent in someone's backyard with 2 teenage sons. Tonight they're sleeping in a house. I mean, those things keep us going. You know.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Kay, I think that's all the time we have for today.
Did we lose Kay?
I think we might have lost Kay. Well, I just wanted to say thank you so much, Kimberly and Vera, for sharing all of this wonderful information with us. For those of you on the webinar, thank you so much for joining us today. We'll be sending out the slides and the recording of the audio and video to you. And everyone have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Nice to talk to you, Vera.
You too. Good luck. Thanks.